"Mommy, Daddy said you don't live here anymore." Those 7 words, spoken in my 4-year-old daughter Maeve's voice, stopped me cold at the end of our driveway. She was sitting on the front steps in her pajamas, not her winter coat, not her boots, just her thin flannel pajamas with the little foxes on them, the ones I had washed the morning before my shift began. She held her stuffed rabbit pressed tight against her chest, and her bare feet were tucked underneath her on the concrete. Snow had drifted across the bottom step and settled against her ankles. The temperature in Guelph that January night was -14. I didn't call out to her right away. I couldn't. My throat had simply stopped working. I just stood there beside my car, staring at my little girl sitting on the step of our house. The house I paid the mortgage on, the house with the colored lights I had strung along the eaves in December because my husband Derek kept saying he'd get to it, and I could not breathe. Then Maeve looked up and saw me, and her whole face changed. "Mommy." I crossed the driveway in seconds. I pulled her into my arms and she was shaking, her skin ice cold through the thin fabric, her feet like 2 small stones against my forearm. I wrapped my winter coat around her and held her as tight as I dared. "How long have you been out here, sweetheart?" She didn't answer at first. She just buried her face in my neck. Through the living room window I could see the glow of the television. Then 2 silhouettes. Derek was standing near the kitchen island, and a woman I did not recognize was leaning against the counter beside him. She laughed at something he said, and he touched the small of her back. I had been on shift at the hospital for 11 hours. I had come home 2 hours early because my colleague, Gwen, had offered to cover the rest of my overnight, and I had said yes because I missed Maeve and I thought I would surprise them. I did surprise someone. I did not knock. I did not ring the doorbell. I turned around, tucked Maeve closer against my chest, picked up the little rabbit she'd nearly dropped in the snow, and carried my daughter back to my car. As I buckled her into her car seat, she looked up at me with those wide dark eyes and said, "Are you mad, Mommy?" "No, baby," I said. "I'm not mad at you, not even a little bit." I started the engine and turned the heat all the way up. As I pulled away from the curb, I checked the rearview mirror once. The living room light was still on. Neither of them had looked out the window. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. 3 hours earlier, I had been checking vitals on the cardiac floor, thinking about nothing except getting home. I had been a registered nurse for 9 years, the last 4 on the overnight rotation, and I had learned to hold the world at a careful distance during those hours. Focus on the patient in front of you, chart what you see, save what you can save. I was good at the overnight. I was less good at understanding the distance that had grown between Derek and me, so quietly I had barely noticed it until it was already enormous. We had met 11 years earlier at a mutual friend's backyard party in Kitchener. Derek was funny and warm and had this easy confidence I found immediately appealing. He was working in residential construction then, talking about starting his own renovation company. I was finishing my nursing degree and barely sleeping, and he used to leave coffee outside my apartment door on the mornings after my clinical rotations. We got married 4 years later at a small ceremony in Prince Edward County, with his mother Donna, and my parents, and about 30 people we actually liked. When Maeve was born 3 years ago, I genuinely believed we had built something solid. But solid things can hollow out slowly, from the inside, and you don't always notice until you knock on the wall and hear nothing there. Derek had left his construction job about 2 years into our marriage, after a dispute with his foreman that he described differently every time he told the story. Then he tried flipping houses, which didn't work in the Guelph market, he said, though he never showed me the numbers. Then he enrolled in an online business certificate, then dropped it. Each time something failed, I said the same thing. "We'll figure it out together." My RN salary covered the mortgage on our house on Edinburgh Road South, our car payments, Maeve's daycare at the center on Courtright Road, groceries, utilities. I never said a word about it. I told myself this was what partners did. I told myself his time would come. What I did not see, what I would only understand later, was that my willingness to carry everything had become the ground he stood on while he stopped trying. Maeve had fallen asleep in her car seat by the time I pulled into the Tim Hortons on Stone Road. I sat in the car for a few minutes with the engine running, just listening to her breathe. The lot was almost empty. It was 2:15 in the morning, and snow was still falling steadily, the kind that came down straight and quiet and piled up without fuss. I went inside and ordered a large double-double and a hot chocolate. The young man at the counter didn't ask any questions. He handed me the cups and said, "Cold one tonight," and I said, "Yeah," and that small ordinary exchange almost undid me completely. I brought the hot chocolate back to the car and held it between my hands until Maeve stirred. "Here, sweetheart," I said softly. "Sip this, it'll warm you up." She sat up and took it in both hands and drank without fully waking, and I thought, I will remember this moment for the rest of my life. Not Derek's face through the window, not the woman's laugh. This, my daughter's hands around a cup, trusting me completely. We checked into an extended stay on Hanlon Parkway just before 3. The woman at the front desk had seen everything in her years working nights. She handed me the key card without asking a single question. The room smelled like industrial laundry detergent and had a small radiator that knocked and hummed. I put Maeve down on the bed and pulled off her socks and rubbed her feet between my palms until they were warm again, and she slept through the whole thing. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the parking lot lights catch the snow, and I let myself think. My phone had already begun to light up. 5 missed calls from Derek, then a 6th. I did not answer. Instead, I opened the Ontario Legal Aid website on my browser and searched for family law services in Wellington County. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I had spent 9 years working overnight emergencies. And I had learned, the hard way, that the moments requiring the clearest thinking are exactly the moments when you most want to fall apart. I did not fall apart. Maeve woke up around 8 that morning and immediately asked the question I had been dreading. "Is Daddy angry at me?" I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. I took both of her small hands in mine. "No," I said, "Daddy is not angry at you, not at all." She looked at her rabbit, straightening its ears. "Then why did he say to wait outside?" I found the words slowly, the way you feel your way forward in the dark. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense, and those choices are never, ever your fault. She thought about that for a moment. "Will we go home?" "We're going to have our own home," I said. "A good one, I promise." She leaned against my shoulder. After a while she said quietly, "I'm glad you came, Mommy." Those words held me up for a very long time afterward. The family law clinic in downtown Guelph opened after the New Year holidays. I made an appointment for the first available slot. The lawyer I met with, a composed woman named Ms. Beaumont, who had spent 15 years handling separation and custody cases in Ontario, listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "Before we talk about anything else, let's talk about your financial picture." I thought I knew it reasonably well. I was wrong. That afternoon I sat with Ms. Beaumont and went through our joint checking account, our savings account, our line of credit, and both of our credit cards, one of which I had almost forgotten we had. What I found, looking carefully for the first time in nearly a year, was a record of a life I did not recognize. Restaurant charges that didn't match any meal I remembered. Hotel stays in Toronto and Niagara-on-the-Lake, during periods when I had been on night rotations, and Derek had told me he was home managing Maeve's schedule. Purchases from a jewelry store on King Street. A weekend at a cottage rental in Muskoka in September. Ms. Beaumont went quiet as she scrolled. Then she stopped and turned the laptop toward me. "Who authorized this transfer?" I looked at the screen. $3,000, moved from our joint savings into an account I had never seen before. The signature on the related paperwork was close to mine. It was not mine. "I didn't," I said. She nodded once. "There are several of these." We kept looking. The deeper we went, the colder I felt. Not with anger, but with a clear, steady recognition. Derek had been living a parallel life, and he had been funding it with my paychecks. "Don't confront him," Ms. Beaumont said, before I could speak. "Why not?" "Because people who believe they've already won stop being careful." I drove back to the extended stay and sat in the car for a while before going in. I thought about 9 years. I thought about the coffee left outside my apartment door. I thought about Maeve's feet, cold as stones in the snow. Then I picked up my phone and texted Gwen, "Can you cover Saturday? I have some things to sort out." She replied within minutes, "Already done. Take what you need." I am still grateful for her. Derek filed for separation 6 weeks later. The paperwork arrived by registered mail. Under Ontario's Family Law Act, he claimed equalization of net family property, which was expected. What was not expected was his financial statement, which listed his income as minimal and his assets as nearly non-existent. He claimed he had sacrificed career opportunities to support my work schedule. I read the document twice, then I called Ms. Beaumont. When I arrived at her office, she had the bank records laid out side by side with his sworn affidavit. The discrepancy was not subtle. The hotel stays, the jewelry, the Muskoka rental, the transfers, all of it dated clearly during periods he had claimed to have no significant expenditures. "He filed this under oath," I said quietly. "He did," said Ms. Beaumont. For the first time since New Year's, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, something quieter. The understanding that I no longer had to convince anyone of anything. The documents would do the speaking. The court proceedings took the better part of the year. I will not say it was easy. It wasn't. There were difficult weeks, scheduling conflicts, moments when Maeve would ask for her father, and I would have to hold everything steady while my own composure was somewhere around my ankles. But I kept going back to something Ms. Beaumont had said early on. The best outcome for a child is not the one where either parent wins. It's the one where the child does. I held on to that. By autumn, the separation agreement was finalized. I was granted primary residence of Maeve. The matrimonial home on Edinburgh Road South was sold. After the mortgage was settled, my share was enough for a down payment on a semi-detached on Willow Road, 3 blocks from Maeve's daycare, and close enough to the hospital that I could walk in good weather. It was small. It had a narrow backyard and a kitchen that needed new fixtures. It was the first home that was entirely mine. Maeve ran through every room on the first day. She chose the bedroom with the window seat. She named it her reading room, even though she was 4 and couldn't yet read. Derek's situation unraveled in the way these things tend to, when the foundation was always borrowed money. The woman from that January night, Vanessa, I learned later, left sometime in the spring once the financial investigation made him a less appealing prospect. His renovation business, which he had finally registered in his own name, lost 2 significant clients after word got around about the court findings. Nothing criminal was ultimately pursued, but the court record was public, and trust disappears quickly once it does. His mother Donna called me in November. I almost didn't pick up. She had always been someone who believed, firmly and without much examination, whatever Derek told her. She had made that clear over the years in small ways. A comment here, a particular silence there, the way she used to look at my nursing schedule as though it were a character flaw. I had never argued with her. I had simply kept going. She told me she had gone to the courthouse herself. She had requested copies of the separation documents, expecting to find evidence that I had treated her son unfairly. She had found the bank statements instead. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know that I genuinely didn't know." I believed her, and I believed the shame in her voice was real. "The person you need to make things right with," I said gently, "is Maeve." She came to the park the following weekend. She brought a small stuffed bear, and she looked terrified. Maeve studied her from a careful distance for a minute or 2. Then, because children are somehow built to offer things adults have to practice, she walked over and took her grandmother's hand. "Do you want to see the ducks?" Maeve asked. Donna cried. She tried to hide it and couldn't. I let them walk ahead along the path, and I stood back and watched the bare November trees and the brown water of the Speed River. And I thought, this is what moving forward actually looks like. It isn't dramatic. It's just one small honest thing after another. Derek came to the door in early December. He stood on the front step of my house on Willow Road with a box of Timbits. Maeve's favorite, the chocolate-glazed ones. And he looked like a man who had spent a long time trying to figure out what to say and still hadn't quite found it. "She's at Gwen's for the afternoon," I told him. "I know, I wanted to talk to you." We sat at my kitchen table with mugs of tea, which felt both strange and very ordinary, and he said what I think he'd been working his way toward for months. "I blamed the wrong things," he said. "For a long time I told myself I wasn't the problem. I told myself you were gone too much, that the hospital mattered more to you than I did." He looked at his mug. "The truth is I was jealous of you. I didn't know how to say that, so I just stopped trying. And then I made everything worse." I didn't fill the silence. Some silences are important. I'm not asking for anything, he said finally. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry. For Maeve especially. Then be here for her, I said. That's all I want from you. He nodded. His eyes were red. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and said, She's lucky to have you. I watched him walk down the front path. Then I went back to the kitchen and finished my tea. The Christmas after the settlement was finalized, Maeve asked me at breakfast if Daddy could come for dinner. I looked at her over my toast. She was watching me with the careful, serious look she got when she wanted something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. I think that could work, I said. Her whole face went bright. Derek arrived with Donna and a pecan tart from the bakery on Gordon Street. Maeve answered the door and immediately took her father's hand and pulled him toward the tree to show him the paper snowflakes she had made at daycare. Donna stood in the doorway and looked at me and said, Thank you, and I said, Come in out of the cold. We ate together at my small table. It was not perfect. There were moments of careful politeness and a few longer silences nobody knew how to fill. But Maeve talked enough for everyone, about her books and her best friend at daycare, and the fact that she had learned to write her name and was now working on the names of the ducks at the park. Near the end of the meal, Derek said quietly, I'd like to start being more present, if that's all right. Maeve decides that, I said, follow her lead. He looked across the table at his daughter, who was arranging the remaining pecan pieces on her plate into what appeared to be a face. He nodded slowly. For the first time, I believed he meant it. After they had gone and Maeve was asleep, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow come down on Willow Road. The neighbors across the street had their lights on. Someone was walking a dog in the dark. Everything was quiet. I had imagined, in the worst nights of that January and February, that getting through all of this would feel like arriving somewhere. A destination. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like breathing. Ordinary and unnoticed and essential. Something your body knows how to do even when the rest of you forgets. Maeve came padding into the kitchen in her fox pajamas, the same ones, washed so many times now the foxes had faded, and leaned against my leg. Did you have a good Christmas, Mommy? I lifted her up and held her. She was heavier than she'd been at New Year's. She would keep getting heavier. Yes, I said, the best kind. What kind is that? I kissed the top of her head. The peaceful kind, I said. That's the best kind there is. She thought about that for a moment with the seriousness she brought to everything. Then she nodded, as though I had answered correctly, and put her head on my shoulder, and I carried her back to bed. The greatest thing I built in those months was not a legal case, and it was not a new mortgage, and it was not the promotion that came the following spring. Charge nurse on the overnight cardiac floor, though I was proud of that too. The greatest thing I built was a home where my daughter could fall asleep, without wondering whether she was wanted there. Some people expect you to spend years chasing the score. The truest answer I ever found was simply this: build something so solid, so quiet, so full of ordinary peace, that the betrayal no longer has the final word. It never did.